The book of Revelation is one of the most mysterious and mystifying books of the Bible. Some people are afraid to go near it. Others think that you read it like you read the newspaper. Or, wait a minute, we don't read newspapers anymore, but read the internet. My guest today spent a good bit of time at the Lanier Theological Library as a visiting fellow, and he was reading and thinking and writing this book. Hi, everybody. I'm David Capes. Welcome to the Stone Chapel Podcast. This podcast is part of the Church Leaders Podcast Network, a network dedicated to providing resources for church leaders who want the most up-to-date thinking about Scripture and theology, and who need a bit of counsel about how to navigate these rough, tough cultural waters. Learn more at ChurchLeaders.com/podcast network. Shane Wood is my guest today to talk about his new book, Thinning the Veil, Encountering Jesus Christ in the Book of Revelation. He's a recently minted PhD from the University of Edinburgh. He teaches New Testament and Christian origins at Ozark Christian College. I bet it's not as flat there as it is in Houston. Just a guess. It's an excellent book that is rich, insightful, poetic, well-researched, and clearly written. It's a lot to commend this book. So today, Shane Wood will answer all the questions you have ever had about the book of Revelation here on the Stone Chapel Podcast. Well, not exactly.
This is Shane Wood, professor of New Testament at Ozark Christian College.
Dr. Shane Wood, good to see you, Shane. Welcome to the Stone Chapel Podcast.
Thank you for having me, David. It's good to see you as well.
Yeah, part of this book you wrote, and some of the research that you did while at the Lanier Theological Library.
That's correct. Yeah, you guys graciously allowed me to come and hang out there for a couple of days, and I was very grateful.
Well, we'll hope you come back for a couple of months one of these days and hang out with us longer. Hey, for those who don't know who Shane Wood is, who is he?
I'm a dad of 4 wonderful kiddos, been married to my wife for over 23 years. I'm in my 16th year here at Ozark Christian College teaching New Testament, and I'm an avid Boston Celtics fan, David, just avid.
Really? Okay. We just finished March Madness. Do you watch any of that?
I watch March Madness, but I watch all 82 games of my Boston Celtics. If there's a conflict, I'll pick the Celtics.
So why the Celtics? I mean, did you grow up in Boston or anything?
No, I'm an Indiana boy, and so growing up in the 80s, Larry Bird was our hero from, French Lick, Indiana. So
Larry Bird, I haven't heard that in a long time. We had a parakeet named Larry Bird, so that was a lot of fun, yeah. But Larry Bird, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, he was a good player. I mean, there's some really great players through the years. So we're going to talk here about your book, Thinning the Veil, Encountering Jesus Christ in the Book of Revelation. It's a new book published by InterVarsity Press. It's a great book. I've had a chance to read it. It's interesting. I mean, you're engaging a lot of, I think, very crucial questions. It's not really a commentary, though, is it?
No, it does go through all 22 chapters, but in much more of a contemplative way. I'm handling the text and exegeting things. The way I've described it before is it's almost like Eugene Peterson sits down with Richard Bauckham, sits down with me.
Okay. Oh, that's great. I know both those guys. I knew Peterson briefly, and then Richard Bauckham's been a friend for years. You get the heavy-duty stuff, but it's also pastoral, and it speaks to your heart and just brings about a tear or two. All right, so Thinning the Veil is the title. I thought that was an interesting title. What's the veil exactly?
It's more of this barrier that we seem to experience between us and God, or us and that which we cannot see. And people, they existentially experience it. It is a little bit of an allusion to the veil separating the Holy of Holies and the outer courts. But the idea is that when we pray and when we live, a lot of the times we sense that there's this something that's separating us and God. But Revelation, I try to argue in the book, but I believe also just the text itself, it reveals that the veil between heaven and earth is just not as thick as we thought it was. It's actually quite thin.
I've heard it described before that earth is the first floor of heaven, that In fact, yeah. And you have to sort of spatially think about it as being above, but it's not that it's inaccessible. It's not that there's a chasm that cannot
Right.
be crossed. It's like you said, it's a thinning of the veil, which is great. Sometimes people talk about the veil between those who are alive and those who are passed away. For those who have a parent, like I just heard from a fellow today who had a parent who passed away recently. So you think about that. You think about that separation that's there, and yet there's this hope that we have that those two. There's no veil at all,
Yeah.
is the idea. The book is a lot about Jesus, and I say that in a good way.
Yeah.
But when we were writing about this years ago, we were writing a book called Rediscovering Jesus, and one of the chapters on Revelation, and there's some pretty scary stuff in Revelation. All right.
Yeah.
And so we started talking about the scary Jesus, that Jesus can be kind of scary at times. When you look at the book and you read it and you see the defeat of evil, and it's not overly violent, and yet there is a sense in which there is this battle still that goes on.
Yeah.
You don't call him the scary Jesus. That was us. But do you get what I'm saying? But the
Yeah.
images of Jesus are sort of unsettling that you get, even from the beginning of the book.
Yeah. The part of what I try to bring out is the first five words of Revelation is the revelation of Jesus Christ. And typically, as scary as some of the images are in the book, some of the ways in which we wrestle with Revelation or even kind of force it into conversations about prediction or the end of the world or those can be equally as scary
Yeah.
and I see though that Jesus in Revelation has this tender pursuit where even though John is
Mm.
alone on Patmos, Christ meets him there, that he's in a constant state of working to set the wrongs right, which is what his incarnation was pushing us toward to begin with. And Revelation continues that wonderful part of the story where eventually, as you mentioned in 21 and 22, there is no veil, for God is with his people and we're with
Right.
him.
And in a sense, that seems to be the goal of everything, right? That that future of God being present. And even in the prophets, the glory of God covers the earth like the
Yeah,
waters cover the sea. That kind of image becomes
yeah,
very important. One of the things I love about the book is that you get a lot into a field of study called numismatics, which is
yeah,
the study of ancient coins. And,
yeah.
and I love that because I used to collect some of these things. What did you find so interesting, compelling about ancient coins that you mentioned them here in the book?
That actually was a part of my PhD work at the University of Edinburgh. Was Revelation is it's a book of imagery. I mean, there is Old Testament imagery interwoven into these 404 verses, and yet it's one of those realizations that since this is written to real people at a real time, they were living in a world that was saturated with imagery itself. And the Roman Empire would communicate their messages through the architecture and through the idols, but even through the images on the coins. And so you see at times in Revelation this interaction, this speaking back and forth between its imagery and the imagery that we find on certain Roman imperial coinage.
And those images, I mean, for a Jew, putting those kind of images around, they really just didn't do that, right? But in the Roman world, the imagery was a way of speaking power
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
control. And you couldn't buy or sell without Roman coins in your pocket, right? You go to
Right.
the market. And so every time you had a transaction, you didn't slip them your MasterCard. You had to reach in your pocket, you had to pull out a certain number of coins. And every coin had an image of an emperor. And then things to remind you of the power and, in a sense, omnipresence, it
Yeah.
would seem, of Rome.
Absolutely. And that's why I thought Augustus was so brilliant. He did a lot of different things at the outset of his reign, but one of the things he did was is he took the printing of Roman coins away from the Senate and he oversaw it. Because then his message, as you said, this omnipresent message of dominance and guiding really people through what they're buying and selling to their allegiance. It was a way of saturating the empire and the daily life with the Roman sovereign narrative, their message.
Mm. So when you set out to write this book, you weren't trying to write a commentary, but you were trying to talk through the book and help
Mhm.
us have an encounter with Jesus. That's the subtitle, Encounter with
Yeah.
Jesus in the book of Revelation, and to be able to see these images of Jesus. But there's clearly kind of a substitute world out there where Caesar is not Lord,
Yeah.
and where we're trying to understand the world that is yet to come and giving people some hope in the midst
Yeah.
of that, where there's so much power, so much dominance. And in a sense, you're not in the majority. Christians were not people in the majority. They were a persecuted minority,
Yeah.
as Jews had been before them. Maybe not to the extent that Christians were, but that's a part of their story, right? That's a part of what they're living.
Yeah. Yeah, and within that tension, our eyes can play tricks on us. And that was a part of the thread I'm trying to pull in the book. They're at the end of the first century. The last living apostle has been exiled by Rome onto the island of Patmos. And that naturally conjures questions like, is this really the kingdom Christ came to establish? And is Rome winning? Because it seems like they are. And what do we do with the fact that if John dies, that we're what, abandoned? And so it's a time of crisis of faith. Tension
Mm-hmm.
from physical and non-physical persecution has increased at the end of the first century, and it naturally proffers, specific questions that Revelation intends to answer. And I believe it intends to answer it by, once again, having them encounter Jesus face to face very clearly.
Mm. And there's another John who's in prison who's hoping that Jesus is the one. But even he has some doubts, it seems like, because he sends his disciples to Jesus and say, "Are you the guy, or should we really expect something else?" So you
Yeah.
got two Johns, kind of the story of two Johns there.
Absolutely. And at the center of, yeah, Matthew 11 there, and even, John and his brother, James and John, it's the question of power. What really does power look like?
Hmm.
And what John the Baptist saw in Jesus was not what he expected when he
Yeah,
thought of a Messiah. And
yeah.
what John, the apostle on Patmos, was probably expecting, he himself was in a time period of strife and struggle. And that's part of what I tried to do in Thinning the Veil was by going through all 22 chapters, but by embodying that tension, that strain,
Hmm.
that loneliness, and that questioning of where is God when Rome seems to be winning?
Yeah. I love the way that there's this dynamic in Revelation between what you see and what you hear.
Yeah,
That he hears a trumpet and that what he turns to see are lampstands.
yeah,
And what he hears is a lion, or hears about a lion, and he turns to see a lamb.
yeah,
And he hears about 144,000, but then he turns to see, and there's a multitude that's too great to be counted. And you do have a section, I should say, in the back that talks about numerology, the importance of it. But it seems to me that things are always being, I don't say shifting, but what you hear is not always what you get.
yeah,
And you're seeing the lion who is the lamb, and you're
yeah,
seeing the trumpet, which also are lampstands, among which the Son of Man is walking and very present with, even though he seems to be, I'm sure, very absent as well among the
yeah.
seven churches.
Yeah, the book itself saturates your senses. I mean, it's pulling all of you forward in order to answer the questions that I think are really at the core of who we are as people. And so it does. There are smells in Revelation and tastes in Revelation and sight, but there is this constant twist.
Hmm.
And I think that's even what the incarnation itself was. God that we could not see becomes flesh so that we could see him. And when we see him, it actually startles us, jars us with things like grace that we didn't understand the depths of, and
Hmm.
ideas like loving our enemies that is not natural to the way in which we typically function and move.
Hmm.
And so Revelation, through its imagery, I think does the same thing when we encounter Christ. It inverts our expectations by drawing us deeper into the mystery.
One of the chapters that you have here is about worship and worship being war.
Hmm.
And I thought that was a really interesting way of putting that. What do you mean by worship as being war?
Yeah, in the book of Revelation, that what you have these two competing trinities. The word competing may be overstating it because the competition is not as much from God's side as it is Satan's. This dragon and his two beasts, which mirror the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And what they are all going toward or gathering, is they're using their tools to gain the worship. I mean, in Revelation, who you worship, it has transformative impact on you, but it is
Mm-hmm.
also what's being asked of Christians to fight this battle by worship, which frankly even Rome themselves understood that worship was essential to gathering the people, which is why they populated their cities with temples and cultic rituals and parades and
Mm.
because worship shapes us. It also guides our allegiances. And in Revelation, yeah, worship is war.
Yeah.
That's how you fight.
And there's a sense in which we become what we worship when we're worshiping empire and we're worshiping power or money, let's say, that we begin to embody that. But when we worship something other than this left-handed power, this one who loves, this lamb who's also a lion, when we do that, then we are transformed into a different kind of person.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Worship is always transformative,
Yeah.
which is in some sense something that I think that is easy to overlook even in our times of worship.
Yeah.
But you are becoming someone whenever you are engaging
Yeah.
worship. Yeah.
And so when early Christians are asked to recant, I
Yeah.
mean, talking about early on, when they're asked to say, okay, you can't be a Christian anymore or we're going to kill you. And the way that you demonstrated you were no longer a Christian was through worship,
Yeah.
through offering incense to the emperor. They capturing your heart, your loyalty, by capturing your worship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is easy to overlook, I think, in a world that's so busy and filled with distractions. But
Mm.
usually it's the satanic goal all throughout history. If he can gather our attention and gather our worship, he can create us into something we never thought we'd become.
That's a great way of putting it. So, as you started this project, did you find out anything? Sometimes we write a book because we already know the stuff, But we also sometimes begin writing something and say, gosh, I'd never seen that before. Did you have any of those aha moments, eureka moments when you wrote this?
Yeah, often.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
say a couple that come to mind is I was startled by the way in which Revelation bends space and time in order for God to be close to us. Space and time in Revelation don't function the same way.
Mm.
For
Mm-hmm.
John's on the island of Patmos, which would seem like he was away from God, but then Christ appears to him on Patmos. But then in chapter 4, John is actually taken up into heaven. Like space and time in Revelation are malleable, but that's intentional because ultimately we look at space and time as prisons. But God looked at it as a context through which he could interact with us and we could know him.
Mm.
That to me was a pretty jarring moment for me. The one other one that actually came to mind was that I saw Revelation chapter 1, verses 17 through 18 differently. It's this beautiful moment where John falls down at Jesus' feet, and it says he falls down as though he is dead.
Yeah.
And then it says, and Jesus reaches out and touches him. And then
Mm.
the first words Jesus said is, "Do not be afraid."
Mm.
And my thought was, oh my goodness, that is the book of Revelation in short. And frankly, that's the gospel.
Yeah.
In our deadness, Christ reached across the chasm, touches us, and says, "Don't be afraid. Follow me. Wherever I go, follow me." Yeah, I had quite a few worshipful moments while this book was unfolding.
Yeah. Well, it's a terrific book. It's entitled Thinning the Veil, Encountering Jesus Christ in the Book of Revelation. It's by Shane Wood. Shane, any kind of last words before we part today?
Just thank you so much for having me on and for engaging the book. And hopefully we will continue to press deeper into the revelation of Jesus Christ.
It's a fantastic book. It's an important book because it takes the scary Jesus and sort of makes him less scary. and he brings him close, and people who have heard the podcast will understand what I'm talking about there. Dr. Shane Wood, great to have you. Thanks for being with us today on the Stone Chapel Podcast.
My pleasure.
It's great to see young scholars find their way to the Lanier Theological Library to be visiting fellows. If you're interested in a 2-week or 2-month or even longer research leave at one of the best theological libraries in North America, staying in the nicest cottages you have ever seen, and all for $0. Why? Because it's already paid for. Send me an email at david.capes@lanierlibrary.org. I'll send you an application to see if your project qualifies for our Visiting Fellows program, just like Shane J. Wood did. Thanks to Jana Firestone and Jessica Mauser for their expert production assistance on this podcast. Thanks to Phil Kagi and me for the music. Thanks to our audio editor, my wife, the fetching Kathy Capes. The Stone Chapel Podcast is brought to you by the good people at the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, Texas. The bad people had nothing to do with it. Just some podcast humor, that's all. Until next time, I'm David Capes. Thanks for listening.